And because of the different sources that create the problem, the solutions may be completely different as well.
Are you interested in the difference between cities in the developing and developed countries? What do you think about solutions for the right problems? How can we find the root causes? Stay tuned for answers from Mat Santamouris.
What is the future for cities? Do you want to learn more about them? Do you want to know how others think about them? Do you want to be part of the conversation? Then this is the right place.
Welcome to What is the Future for Cities podcast. Today, I will interview Mat Santamouris, Scientia Professor at the University of New South Wales. We will talk about his vision for the future of cities, developed and developing countries, finding the root causes, migration, climate change, and many more. So let's start with a proper introduction. Professor Mat Santamouris is a global leader in energy and building physics, specializing in sustainable architecture and urban heat island mitigation. He holds the Anita Lawrence Chair in High Performance Architecture at the University of New South Wales, Australia. With over 15 books and 450 scientific publications, his research advances energy efficiency, renewable energy, and smart building materials. He has led international projects shaping policy and building standards worldwide. As an advisor to governments and global organizations, he influences energy policy and climate strategies. Recognized with multiple awards, his work enhances urban resilience and sustainability in response to climate change. And with that, Matt, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for your time. I highly appreciate your appearance on the podcast. And let's jump right in. What does the future of cities mean to you?
First, thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to share my opinions about the future of cities. This is a very complicated issue because the future of cities has to do with too many issues. It has to do with, let's say, social issues. It has to do with, let's say, technological issues. It has to do with environmental issues. It has to do with productivity, cognition, too many things. And it has to do also with trends we follow in our cities, like the overpopulation, market change, the increase of energy consumption, all these things. I really believe that the future of cities will have to diversify what is happening first in the cities of the developed world and what is happening in the cities of the developing countries. It's not the same thing, it's completely different. And the future of the cities depends very much on the economic and social conditions in the different countries and also on the impact of, let's say, the different parameters, climatic change and many other things. I'm not seeing a common future for our cities. The future of the cities will be completely different from country to country and from place to place, depending on the problems we have to face in these countries.
Thank you so much for immediately diversifying cities, because then I would love to understand, what do you mean by this term city? What does the city mean to you? And then we will go from there.
City is not really just a combination of buildings. It's much more than that. It's a place where people is living, where you have social activities, economic activities, the quality of life of people, an ensemble of functions that really offers the necessary in order to survive and in order to have a good quality of life. It's not just bricks and concrete. It's much more than that.
And what kind of cities can we talk about? You started to differentiate them based on being in a developed or a developing country. Do you have other differentiating factors when you think about cities?
This is the major parameter that can differentiate, in my opinion, cities. And then we can have different criteria. If really we talk about the standards, the social drivers, we may differentiate the cities according to the population. We may differentiate cities based on environmental criteria. For example, if there's a coastal cities or non-coastal cities, we may differentiate cities based on their infrastructure. Many, let's say, parameters that we may differentiate the different cities. However, I strongly believe that two major drivers. What is happening in the developing countries, which is almost in common with some differences, and what is happening in the developed world. So this is, in my opinion, the major differentiation we can have. Then, of course, between developed countries, there are many differences based on the climatic conditions. For example, a city in Finland or a city in, let's say, Cyprus or in Greece, completely different because of the climate. So the problems are different, the environmental problems are different, and the solutions are different. But the three social trends, and in general, the environmental, energy, health, cognition, productivity, etc., trends are almost the same. Also, in the developing countries, they might have completely different, let's say, evolution. Lahore in Pakistan faced problems of pollution, energy consumption. At the same time, other cities in China have the same problems sometimes, but they have other problems to face. For example, problems of new infrastructure or overpopulation. So, of course, differences, but for sure, we have to investigate what is happening in our cities, really understand the drivers that create the problem. We start from there. If we don't understand the problems, perhaps we may suggest solutions that may solve other problems, not the real problems in the cities. So we need to have a very scientific approach. First, which are the problems in the specific city? Of course, we can combine problems. Which are the drivers and the sources behind the problems? Which are the possible solutions that may, let's say, alleviate the impact of the different drivers? So my approach is, first, let's really understand the problems. Let's describe the problems. Second, let's understand the reasons behind the problems. And let's try to find solutions that really alleviate the impact of the sources.
I completely agree with you that I would say that each city with their own set of problems for which we need to find the root causes and then find the appropriate solutions. If we talk about the two big groups you mentioned, the developed countries with cities and the developing countries with cities, what kind of trends do you see for them regarding the future of cities?
Starting from the developed countries, the real problems in developed countries are really, first of all, social problems. Very important social transformations in cities of the developed world. And for example, what is happening regarding the type of jobs in cities? What's happening with the new people that is coming there? What is happening regarding, let's say, the stratification of the population? Problems that have to do in developed countries with, first, the social transformation in the countries. Second, the impact of the climatic change on different levels that have to do in general with the overall improvement of the quality of life. In developing countries, the problems are completely different. The major problem, in my opinion, there has to do with overpopulation, which is not a problem in the developing. On the contrary, in most of the developed countries, the population is decreasing. Although the urbanization is increasing, imagine that the size of the cities in the developed countries is really decreasing or remains stable. In developing countries, the major problem, in my opinion, it has to do with the overpopulation. The size of the cities is increasing tremendously. This overpopulation, combined with the local, let's say, economic and social problems, creates important new social problems and a new stratification, which is not the same in all developing countries. And because of the social and economic problems, the overpopulation, and unfortunately, the local and global climatic change, will have extremely important environmental problems there, pollution, overheating, many things. We have to do with a tremendous need for new infrastructures. We have to do with poverty, because we don't have the resources really to settle all the new population. We have to do with low standards of life. And we have to do at the same time with a non-well-determined future for the new generation there. There is a great hope for the population moving from, let's say, agricultural areas to the cities, but I'm not sure if there is future for these people under the present conditions. So the problems are different. And because of the different sources that create the problem, the solutions may be completely different as well.
Are these issues your fears? Or do you have, for example, the three biggest fears or concerns regarding the future of cities different from these issues?
There are tremendous fears. For example, in developed countries, in my opinion, an important social problem that perhaps is not so well understood of neo-poverty. For example, the change of the economic infrastructure and economic capacity, the cities of the developed world towards a new economy where services like banking, artificial intelligence, telecommunication has changed, has created a new infrastructure, social infrastructure, and a new social certification. The population that used to work on the industrial, the manufactural domain and the economic activities, they have really to change the way they live. They have to find new jobs, and most of them in the big developed countries, they are losing their jobs and have to do something new. But given that they are not really trained properly, they became really the new poors of the cities. And this creates a tremendous, not only social and economic certification, but an environmental certification, an energy certification, many other issues. In developed countries, the main issue is the social transformation. It is the driver that changes the cities, together with climatic change. In developing countries, social transformation is very important. But social transformation is very much enforced by overpopulation. Overpopulation and increase of the population done under, let's say, non-controlled conditions. Millions of people moving from the countryside to the city, trying really to find a job or have a better quality of life, but non-trained people aren't really ready to spend the proper resources in order to have the quality of life, which put immediately these people into margin of the cities, creating immediately environmental, social, and also educational, energy, cognition, productivity problems. This is combined with climatic change that really increases the strength of the problem for the low-income population or the vulnerable population. So at the end, this creates a tremendous stratification in the developing cities, where you may have really fantastic, tremendous differences with millions of people living under unbelievable poverty without the proper infrastructure or the proper resources and facilities. And on the other hand, have extreme richness and wealth in the cities. This tremendous social stratification that may happen in these countries, together with the need for new jobs, new infrastructures, and also new solutions to solve the problem of climatic change that can be more specific in ways, this creates an explosive condition in developing cities and in developing countries.
Finding the root causes is always at least challenging. What would you recommend for communities, cities, countries, how they would start finding these root causes? Because you mentioned this can be a scientific approach. It's not necessarily always a scientific approach, but what would you recommend how the developing and the developed communities, countries, cities would find these root causes for their problems?
First, I think that it is very important to understand the problems, identify the problems. Starting from the developed countries, the problems may be completely different. For example, the problems in New York are not really the problems we have, let's say, in a small European city. Number one, identify the problems. This is the most important. And once the problems are identified, then the second is to understand which are the drivers that create the problem. Is it really the social transformation? Is it climatic change? Is the lack of infrastructure? Is really the standards we're using? Is the combination of all of this? It's very important to understand and identify the drivers behind the problems. The solutions is not something which is simple, because you may identify solutions, for example, for the environmental problems. But if really the drivers that create the environmental problems are not really well understood and well faced, you may have a change of the nature of the problem, create a new problem somewhere else. You need really to have an holistic approach of the way that we identify the problem. And it is not easy, because this is very much linked to the social and economic development of the cities. For example, take the city of New York. 30, 40 years ago, the cities were mainly based on manufacturing. Mid-class and low-class, and a little bit mid-high class, they used to live because of manufacturing. there was infrastructure. The last years changed completely. We have a new economy, the economy of services, banking, telecommunications, all these kind of things. This has created a new generation of population, new experts to understand. Of course, this has really put millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people working on the manufacture of, let's say, infrastructure, manufacture of the country into the margin. So they lost their job, they had really to do something new, and this is not obvious. So as a result, we have a new class of extremely well-educated and extremely well-paid population. And on the other hand, we have another class which really lost their job. They don't have really the proper resources. So they are doing and they are working on low quality and not well-paid jobs. As a result, for example, now in New York, the service class, all these young guys, they work on services, they get about 45% of the income of the cities, when the rest, especially those that really they used to work on the manufacturer domain, they get only 10%. So this is a tremendous social and economic difference. Because of this difference, we have a difference on the landscape of the city. Why? Because those that they have the economic capacity, they can really buy specific areas or they can live in areas where the price is very high, and by living there, the price is increasing. On one hand, those that they don't have the resources, they have to live in areas with lower prices, which unfortunately present important environmental problems, high pollution, high overheating, low infrastructure, not proper education, many things. The important social and economic problems translate the life of people and transfer the social and economic problems into environmental, energy, education, and many other problems. It is very difficult, really, to change this trend. Very difficult. And this requires completely social and economic transformation, which cannot happen from one day to the other. These are transformations that happen every 40, 50 years, maybe more. And I'm not sure if someone likes to change this, because this has to do with the overall political system in the developed countries. So I'm afraid that gradually, if we don't really take care for the vulnerable and low-income population, this gap, this social distance, which is translated to economical, etc., gaps, will really increase or deepen, and this will create social tensions, and this will create more poverty. And given that in most of these cities, we may expect to have an important immigration, some people really not like to have more immigration, but this is impossible to have millions of billions of immigrants. So the new immigrants plus the low income and vulnerable population, which may present, depending on the city, a very high fraction of the population, will be the source of important social, political, and economic tension, which for the time being are not well identified. If really we don't take proper, let's say, measures, we may have surprises in the future. This problem will be much higher. The magnitude of the problem will be much higher in developing countries, because it's not only the social transformation, it's not only the poverty, it's not only the economic, environmental, energy, educational self-differences which are created by the social transformation. It is at the same time the new population coming. And for this population, in many cities, there is no infrastructure. Where they have to live? Under which condition? We expect that in developing countries, by let's say 2050, 2060, when we have more than 2 to 3 billion of people living under extreme heat, very extreme temperature conditions that we never had in the human history. This population, because they have to live in vulnerable areas without infrastructure, with high temperature, without proper education, without proper infrastructure, they have really to face the problem of climatic change, which means that if they don't have the resources, for example, to face the problem by using air conditioning, they have to live under completely unacceptable conditions. And all studies have shown that these adaptation strategies that we really foresee for the future, one of these is air conditioning, it is really accessible only to the middle and high class. For example, in Mexico, The low class or the low income population, for the time being, only the 5-6% of the population has access to air conditioning. And by 2050, this 5% will be 10%. The rest will live under unbelievable heat. If for any reason the problem is solved by offering them free electricity and free air conditioning, there will be tremendous problem at the country level. In India, because of the extreme heat that we had the last 2 years, 50 degrees and more, there was a tremendous increase of the penetration of air conditioning, even in very low-income houses, because it was easy to buy air conditioning. It was easy really to install it. Although the Indian government changed the regulations and the legislation, and it was necessary to get an approval really to install an air conditioning, but who cares about it? They installed the air conditioning without the permission. As a result, the last years, the increase of the peak electricity demand in India was close to 15.4%. Do you understand what it means for a country? Increase of the demand per year close to 15%? There is no country that can face this problem. 15% more power plants per year? Which kind of power plants? Conventional energy sources? New energy sources? Well, really we can't find the proper capitals for the investments. What about the pollution? What about the emissions? What about, let's say, the cost of the electricity? As a result of this tremendous increase of the peak electricity demand in India, during the extreme events or during the periods of high temperature, in most of the Indian cities, electricity is available for no more than 5 hours per day. So you understand that there is really an important link and interconnection between the problems. Perhaps someone likes really to offer solutions, get air conditioning, install air conditioning, but immediately you create another problem because there is not the proper infrastructure. You need to have a completely holistic approach. But this holistic approach, it is very much related to the economic resources in the economic capacity. For example, to alleviate the impact of climatic change in the built environment, we'll have to spend about 1.6 trillion American dollars per year from now to 2050. Most of the money have to be spent in developing countries. Unfortunately, these resources are not available. And no one believes that these resources will be available through the loans or transfer of resources from the developed countries. This is almost impossible. We know that this is not possible. How really developing countries will find the proper resources to solve the problem? Perhaps through loans. But actually, the important debt of the developing countries, which is more than 20 trillions, do not allow the countries to spend on other domains. In India, they spent more in order really to satisfy the debt per year than the annual budget for health, education, and transport. There is a tremendous need for investments to improve the infrastructure and solve the problem, but there are no resources. With the actual economic system and the actual financial state of the art when living, I don't see any solution in these countries. I don't see how really we can solve the problem. When a very deep transformation of the economic system in the world, not only in these countries. It's not a small problem, just give air conditioning to the people, or just improve the low-income neighborhoods and give them the conditions that they have to live. No, this means infrastructure, this means investments, this means a lot of things. We have to go through the whole chain from the very beginning to the very end. I don't see really for most of the developing countries proper solutions without completely changing the economic infrastructure in the world. For the developed countries, things are completely different. I believe that because there are some efforts in most of the developed countries, they have some resources to improve the conditions, that there will be some improvements, but not to the proper level. This is a static approach. Because this approach considers that there will not be interaction between the developing and the developed countries. This is not the truth. We will have a tremendous flux of immigrants from developing countries which face the problems that we just described towards the developed countries. And you can't stop this integration with new walls, with new nets, and with any legislation. It will be impossible. The whole, let's say, interaction between the developing and the developed cities and countries is very dynamic. It depends on the economic systems. So those that believe that in the near future, we'll have, let's say, cities with suitable conditions. We will have also cities where millions of people will live under completely unacceptable conditions. We're right, but this will create a new dynamic in the world, a new dynamics that really would be very difficult to predict the consequences and the cycle to face, because the characteristics of this new dynamic relation between the developed and the developing countries is not so well understood for the time being. So isolation is not a solution. Trying to find proper solutions for developing countries is really the only way to avoid such a problem in the future. But I don't see anyone who wants really to develop and consider such relations. Actually, we just give some money, 100 billion per year. If we give, this is nothing compared to the real needs. There is an exploitation also of the local population in many ways. We spent enough money, I think, especially in Europe, not so much in the United States, and in the future they will spend less, in order to improve the quality of our lives. But the whole problem, I really do not consider this dynamic in the relation that is coming in the future, and not really so important immigration. The problems that really create, you may say, developed cities, Germany, United States, really creates a new political system or new political conditions with, let's say, populists trying to exploit what really is happening in these cities because of the immigrants. There are some problems with immigrants, but the problems are not created because of the immigrants. This is the more problem that we have. Starts to create important political transformations, both in Europe and the United States. I can't imagine the real transformations that will happen in the developed world when the stratification between the developed and the developing world will be so high that it really will ask for radical systems and radical politics from these countries, without success, of course. So I'm expecting that the important differences that will be created in the future will really change completely the political status in the developed countries. And this is the major risk that we may have in the developed world. And we see that. The increase of the populism because of the immigration is not such an important problem. The immigrants in the United States are used for many reasons and they need them. And by put out of the country 10,000, 20,000, 100,000, don't believe really the economy will change and people will live better. Because the real problem is not that the immigrants, they get a high part of the budget of the country or the income of the country. The real problem is that the 1% gets the 50% income. If we don't touch these people, where they have really all the wealth of the world, just follow those that they get 0.1% of the income, you may get back the 0.1%. This 0.1% would go to those that they have the 50%. If we don't understand how really the important certification, the important difference which are created will change our political system, then we may have high surprises.
You really described how we need a holistic approach to these. So, for example, I loved that you say it's not enough to give people air conditioning because then we just have another problem with how to generate enough energy and where we would get enough energy and who would pay for those HVAC systems and just even more. So, after this doom and gloom, what are the three biggest opportunities regarding the future of cities for you?
The future of cities is very much related to the future of the economic conditions in the world. Cities are not isolated. Cities are part of countries. Cities are part of the economic systems. And economic systems are so much interrelated. The future of cities depends very much on the future of the economic conditions in the world. And the economic system will create a new social status in the developing countries. And these new social and economic conditions will create new political conditions, both in developing and developed countries. But the future of cities depends really on the economic system that we may have in the future. If we consider that nothing changes, what will happen is that poverty, environmental problems, energy problems, educational problems, and low quality of life will deepen in the developed countries because of the overpopulation and because of the lack of economic resources. And in developed countries, we may, let's say, have better environmental energy conditions. Is one improvement, but we will have very deep and serious political changes and transformations. which have already started and will be created because of this tremendous stratification and the pressure the stratification will really put. I'm not saying that in developed countries we will not have political changes. We may have political changes, and we may have new forces, and we may have a new system. But this is something that cannot be absolutely predicted. But if we continue business as usual, for sure the gap will increase, and this gap will create social and unfortunately political changes.
Do you believe that we are changing our ways? Do you believe that we are changing the business as usual approach? Are you optimistic about the future of cities?
What does it mean optimistic? Optimistic means that conditions will improve. For example, in developed countries, the conditions may improve a little bit because they have the resources. For example, in Europe, they spend almost trillions to improve the environmental conditions. There are new problems for sure, but the conditions will improve. Although we'll have a completely new and very dynamic phenomenon. The climatic change and the increase of the temperature in cities and the increase of the frequency of the extreme phenomenon may put a tremendous strain on the health system in developed countries. There is a very recent study published in Europe that shows that by 2050, if really nothing changes, we might have 1 million because of the overheating. So there will be problems. There will be important problems because of dynamic condition. But the problems in developed countries will be 10 times higher without really solutions and without the resources to solve the problem. If we continue business as usual, we will have a bit better conditions, environmental conditions in developed countries, but about 70% or 80% of the global population living under completely uncertain conditions. This will have tremendous consequences and impacts also in the developed countries. This is where we are going with the actual system.
I'm curious whether you see signs of change for our approaches to how we solve these urban problems.
The economic system is not changing. On the contrary, it really starts to reduce the resources for those in need. It's very obvious. Without resources, with a tremendous debt of the developing countries, I don't see how they can improve in other conditions. They can do something, but they cannot improve it. We then have cities with millions of population living with tremendous pollution. Actually, in Delhi or in Lahore, the concentration of particulate matter is close to 1,000 micrograms per cubic meter, with the threshold set by the World Health Organization of 10 and 15. And this has a huge impact on the quality of life, but also creates tremendous health problems. Health problems which are not well known, because we don't have the proper statistical systems. We don't know what is happening there. How really you can decrease the pollution in Delhi? You have to change the fleet of the cars. You have to move industry out of the city. Many other solutions. You can do that. Who has really the resources to do that? Either we transfer these resources from the other countries, something that I don't see to happen, or there is a local development which is higher and overpasses the needs that really may finance this specific new demand. But for the time being, this is not the case. Even in countries like China, which has a tremendous development. But the environmental problem, energy problems, health problems are very serious. Although they have the resources, China has the resources. Hundreds of trillions in the banks. Has the capacity, but the problems cannot be solved easily. The magnitude of the problems is so high that the actual, economic systems do not leave a lot of opportunities and a lot of optimism. So we need really to develop something completely new. So not be based on the transfer of resources from the developed countries to the developing countries. It has to do with the redistribution of the world wealth between the whole population. Once 1% of the population gets 50-60% of the resources, and this population is living in specific areas, then we don't have enough resources for the rest. So we have to examine how the wealth which is generated by all of us is distributed in a fair and equal way to all of us. This is not the trend. We don't expect this. But we need to have the resources to finance the global development in a sustainable way. This is not the trend. On the contrary, the trend is completely opposite. So this do not really allow a lot of optimism. In general, I'm sorry to insist, but the future of cities and the future of countries depends very much on the overall economic system in the world.
It's not necessarily very flowery future vision. I also understand that change is needed. Why don't we do this change? Why is it so hard for us to change the current economic system, as you mentioned?
Those that they have to make the decisions to change, they have different interests. And they don't like really to distribute their resources or their income and wealth to the others. In major countries, for example, we neglect the problem of climate change. We don't consider at all everything. We don't consider at all the climate change and the extreme phenomenon. So why is this happening? Because these people is not convinced about climatic change? No. I think that they have the proper knowledge. No. We understand those that they can change the world and can make decisions to change the world. They have their interests, their benefits, and they prefer really to continue the way that really they know well, despite really the damage that is created, than to change on the benefit of the world, the rest of the population. This is the reality.
I'm curious whether a solution which deprives of people who currently enjoy comfort is really a good solution, because I don't think that would fly at all. So I'm curious what other options are there. And for example, in my conversations, there are solutions which are available, which are cheaper, which provide hope that we can change even the economic system, but not necessarily in a way which deprives the current people who have comfort and ask them to give up their comfort, because I'm not sure whether that's a viable option. On the other hand, obviously, it's also not suitable to ask the developing countries to, you shouldn't get there, because this is a comfort which comes at a price of, for example, the planet, because people also want to live comfortable in the developing countries. I agree with you completely that we need to find a solution which creates a new paradigm. That's for sure. I'm curious what kind of new paradigm that could be. We have been talking about this holistic approach, and I would like to ask you to give us a whole holistic approach through one problem. And you are expert on urban heat islands. So I would like to ask you to explain for us what urban heat islands are, the root causes, and also the consequences, because I think we very often forget not just the first, but second and third order consequences of these issues.
Urban heat island is a phenomenon where really the more dense parts of the city, for in general the cities, present higher temperatures than the surrounding suburban or, let's say, rural areas. There are more than 500 cities around the world, maybe more, that present a very high magnitude of urban heat island. Cities, for example, in India, where the center of the city may be 10 degrees of higher temperature than the surrounding suburban areas or rural areas. The reasons behind the overheating are not always the same. It has to do with thermal balance in the cities, and cities will have thermal gains because of the materials we're using. We have a very high storage of heat, asphalt, the concrete, and this increases the temperature. We don't have enough greenery. We don't have enough evaporation. We have a very high generation of anthropogenic heat because of traffic and because of industry, many other reasons. This changes completely the thermal balance of cities. In some other cities, we may have overheating because of the proximity of desert. For example, Sydney presents in the western part 10 degrees higher temperature. Well, the eastern part, but not because we don't have enough greenery, because we're using peculiar materials, because of the advection of heat from the desert. So the reasons are not always the same, but in general, the problem is because, of the non-purple materials, the high anthropogenic heat, and many other reasons. Unfortunately, there is a very important synergy between urban heat island, or as we call it, regional climatic change, and the global climatic change. And during the extreme phenomena, during the period of heat waves, for example, the magnitude of the urban heat island is increasing. Global climatic change is increasing the magnitude of urban heat island. Actually, we have developed in the last 15 years very important mitigation technologies that can decrease temperature of cities up to 5 degrees. Have succeeded really to decrease the center of the city up to 5 degrees. This is very important. These are the good news. Unfortunately, these new technologies cannot be used everywhere because of the lack of resources and because of the lack of knowledge. For example, in India, they are using Kulu bird solutions in all schools, so they can decrease the indoor temperature to 8-9 degrees, provide comfort to people and to students. So there are solutions, because technology has really helped to develop these new solutions. Technology is doing a great job. We have new materials, you have new technologies. We have really the tools to decrease the magnitude of the overheating. But it is not really proper to consider that technology is enough. Technology has to go hand by hand with the proper economic and financial tools. Without the proper economic and financial tools, technology cannot be implemented properly. For example, in cities, those that they pollute, those that they increase the temperature, they don't pay the cost. The cost is, let's say, distributed equally to everyone. A possible economic, financial, political transformation in our cities is really to ask all those that increase the temperature, including local council, because they are using no proper materials, including all those that really they decrease the greenery effects, including all those that increase the temperature and increase the pollution, to pay for it. We can do it. We have the tools here. And on the other hand, we need really to transfer the resources to those that they help to solve the problem. They decrease the temperature because they create the proper mitigation technologies. They use the proper materials. They use more building. We have to create really this mechanism that those that really they create environmental and energy problems in cities, they have to transfer and pay the cost to those that they really provide solutions. The technological solutions which are available have to be combined with the proper financial changes and transformation in cities. They have to go hand by hand. Without really these transformations, though really that they increase the temperature in cities, they will continue to do it. For example, in Sydney, councils, they put black asphalt. Black asphalt during summer increases the temperature of the city by 12 degrees. It does a tremendous impact on energy, on everything, on pollution. Why they are doing that? Because they don't care. Because they don't know. Once you ask them to pay the penalty, they will know. They will get the knowledge. And they will change. If they don't pay the penalty, they will continue doing it.
Matt, you have been very generous with your time and answers, and I completely agree with the holistic approach and that we need to find the right solutions to the right cities. What is your role in establishing the future of cities?
What I'm trying to do is really to first work and develop new mitigation adaptation solutions. I think that we have done some work and we have developed new materials and also try to implement these solutions in different cities. I was very lucky really to have the opportunity to implement these solutions in different cities around the world and have good results. I'm very lucky. This is really my contribution. As professor at the university, I have a need to inform my students. I have to educate them, not only on technological developments, not only on technical issues, but we have to inform them about the reasons behind the problem. And of course, we're not doing political economy. They have to understand and guide them properly, and they can have their own opinion. So, development of technology, education, and at the same time, expressing our thoughts the way we are doing that here. And when we have the opportunity, discuss with decision makers may also help. I think that some decision makers, they have an open eye and they wish to hear and do something. Many of them, they have subsidy. Many others, they're completely different. But this is the contribution of a scientist, of a researcher. We have to do our job, develop new technology, educate our students, transfer our knowledge to decision makers, transfer our knowledge to the people.
And please keep up this good work because we need this kind of knowledge to change the future of cities to something we really want. Thank you so much for your time again. Do you have any closing comments or requests for the audience?
I think that despite the not very optimistic description of the conditions, it is very important that the population well informed. This is the only hope. Only if population is well informed and not informed with fake information. When it is well informed, When they know the reasons, when they know the drivers behind the problems, we can act. I strongly believe if the population is well educated and really wishes a change, population can do it because the decision makers, they will follow. So everything starts from knowledge of the population, of the people. It is very important to inform people. And your work, what you're doing here, is extremely important, and to verify interest and contribute towards this game. There is no other way. We have to improve knowledge, and people first understand really why and how we can improve our quality of life.
Thank you so much, Matt.
They're very welcome.
It was really interesting to hear from Matt about the need for the holistic approach, not to mention his expertise on urban heat islands. Joe Glesta talked about urban resilience through the heat island effect in episode 244. You can find out more about Matt online. All the links are in the show notes. What was the most interesting part for you? What questions did I raise regarding Matt's approach to the future of cities? What have you learned from this interview? Let me know on Twitter at WTF4Cities or on the WTF4Cities.com website where the transcripts and show notes are available. You can also subscribe on the website not to miss any new episodes and leave some feedback. I hope this was an interesting interview for you as well, and thanks for tuning in.
What is the Future for Cities podcast?